Hello there. Today we're looking at a portable espresso machine that has some pretty impressive claims. Let me go get it. Dun, da, da, da. This right here is the Outin Nano. This is a portable travel espresso machine that is bundled into a relatively small package. Let's break into it, let's talk about it, and let's brew some coffee. The Outin Nano comes with a primary brewing body and a couple of accoutrements. Let's look at our accessories first. You have a Type-C charging cable. This piece here is an alternative insert into the brewer that allows you to use Nespresso-sized capsules. We're not going to be using this today, but just so you know, it is an option. And then, of course, perhaps my most favorite of the items, we have the Tampon Scoop. Of note, the Outin Nano comes in a variety of colors. I kind of had a treat yourself moment and thought I'd go for the pink one today. I also did have the thought that if I got the black model, it might blend in a little too much with what I wear. So, in the bottom here, you have what functions as kind of a catch cup or a drinking cup if you prefer. This section on the bottom unscrews and houses your coffee, whether you are using a pod or your own coffee. You have a lid with a little dispersion screen on the bottom, your primary coffee basket, and then the chamber that locks back into the main body. On the body of the brewer itself, you don't have that much you can fiddle with. You have your USB-C charging port here on the back, you have one button that you can press on the front, and then you have a top that is removable. And this is where this brewer starts to get kind of fun. Now the top chamber is for your water. We have some markings along the inside here. Might be a little bit hard to see on camera, but we have a marking for 50 mil or 1.7 ounces. We have a marking for 70 mil or 2.4 ounces, and our max fill line is right around 80 milliliters. However, what is unique about this brewer versus a lot of other handheld portable espresso makers is that up here actually heats your water as well. So in theory, you can travel with this, you can use room temperature or cold water and still have a nice hot shot of espresso. The Nano retails for right around $150, which is definitely on the pricier end of these portable handheld espresso makers, but it is pretty comparable to something like the PicoPresso, which I think is probably its closest competitor. The PicoPresso costs around, I think, $130 total. So this isn't that much more, all things considered. However, kind of the unique value you get here is that you don't have a handheld pump like the Pico does, and you also have this heating element in the top. So, let's make some coffee. Now, as far as grind size goes, we definitely want to be a good deal finer than we would be for pour over. However, you're kind of splitting the difference between pour over and espresso. We don't want it as fine as traditional espresso grind. A little bit finer than table salt, I think, is probably the best visual descriptor for this. This basket that the Outin comes with holds naturally between 5 to 6 grams of coffee. However, you can really crank this thing up to 8 grams, which is what I'm gonna do here today. This is automatically gonna be kind of a shorter shot of espresso for sure due to our size constraints on the portafilter side, but we'll make this work as best as we can. If you need to, give it a nice tap to level it out. And it gives you so much more room to keep filling. Get everything a little bit level, and then we'll use our tiny tamp. Okay, let's make some coffee with this. We put on our cap, press it down so it seals, pop it in here, and then relatively gently just screw everything together. We're gonna be brewing with this a couple of times today. We're gonna start with room temperature water just so you can see the duration it takes to fully heat up to brewing temperature. And then I'll show you some alternative ways you can do this. Now, one of the nice things about this brewer is that it basically is a manual brewer. You can fill the top reservoir up to your desired amount that you wanna brew and then just start it and it'll run through what's in the reservoir, or you can start and stop it using the button on the front. So we can use a scale, we can measure everything manually, we can stop it when we want. It makes it nice and adjustable for shots. Now I know I said we do have a cup here. I'm actually not going to use this to brew into. I'm going to use just an alternative glass cup, both so you can see what the coffee looks like that's being brewed, but additionally, you'll see here in a minute why I don't think this is a good drinking cup, but it is a good stabilizing cup. Initially, you'll hear the heating element kick on, and there will be a beeping in between the heating and the extracting, so we'll know when it's time to move it over above our drinking glass. When brewing from room temperature or cold water, you press and hold for 2 seconds, and then everything begins. So let's start our timer. Okay, I will see you when our water has heated. All right, that's our beep. I'm gonna pull this out to about 30 grams in total. Once I'm about to hit that. And it has this sort of scream at the end that is frankly rather endearing. All right, now, pause here for a minute and you'll see why I am not using this cup, because once you are done with the extraction, you're left with this kind of like damp bottomed brewer that will continue to drip slightly just because there's still water coming through the bed. And so this is why I like to keep this cup on the side, because it makes for a lovely landing place afterwards. If I brewed into this, you're kind of left just like holding your brewer alongside your espresso. Oh wow, and the light is just hitting the espresso so nicely. This is glorious. Okay, now I started with room temperature water, not cold, but just room temperature for this brew, and it took around 4 minutes to reach appropriate brew temperature. Let's stir and taste. Prior to filming this video, I have already brewed on the Nano quite a few times, so I kind of knew what was gonna happen here. What we have in the cup here is an espresso that has a pretty nice texture to it. It has a very visible crema, which is in part due to the fact that the portafilter, if you will, basically acts as a double-walled portafilter, so kind of regardless of what you use, you're gonna have some crema, but the main thing, while this is what I would consider passable shot of espresso, the main detractor is the fact that it is pretty cool in temperature still. According to Outin, the brewing and extraction process begins once the brewer senses that the water has reached between 195 to about 205 degrees Fahrenheit, which is typical brewing temperature. However, based on what is coming out in the cup, I can safely say that it's definitely on the lower end of that. And that temperature specifically makes this kind of a tricky brewer for any coffee that is roasted lighter than, I would say, a medium. Now, there are a couple ways to kind of counteract that. So let's clean up, let's brew a few more times. One of the things I will note on cleaning is to not forget if you have excess water in the upper reservoir. Don't go flinging around your brewer. You might end up with a nice, painful and spicy hot water surprise. Scrape out a majority of the grounds, compost them, toss them, whatever you do, and then just go rinse everything. Okay, now at this point we have run a full heating and water cycle through this brewer. So the main body of the brewer is much warmer than it was initially. And this is, I think, kind of key to getting a tasty coffee out of all of this. Okay, I'm looking at it in my second angle and it's so cute, is it not? This time we are going to brew with room temperature water again, but this time through a preheated body. I love the little scream at the end. Immediately, off the bat, a much hotter shot and definitely a lot tastier. One of the things that became pretty clear quickly when brewing with this is that I think this is a brewer that is best suited to medium to darker roasted coffees, maybe more in a traditional espresso profile rather than the more acidic, bright, lighter roast that you see a lot nowadays. Due to the kind of temperature range, especially if you're brewing out of a cold body, that sounds bad. If you're brewing out of unwarmed is just, if you're brewing raw, if you haven't run a pre-warm cycle through the brewer, I think that's safe to say. If you haven't run a pre-warm cycle through this brewer, I think brewing a really light roast is going to consistently yield you pretty underwhelming and under-extracted results. Now, that's not to say brew 2 shots and then dump one of them. Don't do that. That's very wasteful. What I would instead recommend you do is start out with no coffee in the bottom. So we're just going to have water in the upper chamber. Brew and heat that water. It's gonna spit it down here and then place it back in the top. By doing that, you are then just like reusing your preheated water. Your chamber will already be nice and warm, and then you can add your coffee and brew again. Now, let's talk about the battery capacity of this thing. Now, the main shiny thing about this brewer is definitely that it both preheats the water and then has an electric pump to brew with. However, you can obviously and very, very easily just use preheated water in this. You'll put your hot water up here. You can double press to start extracting immediately, or you can press and hold and maybe it'll heat it very, very slightly before starting the extraction. But regardless, it uses way less energy from the brewer than if you were preheating from cool water. Because of this, if you are using preheated water, say to that 195 to 205 range, you can get like so many brews out of this. Outin themselves claims you can get over 100, and frankly, having done a bunch of preheated brews, I fully believe that. It barely uses any of the battery. It got so dark all of a sudden. Now, conversely, if you do what we have been doing today and you start with your room temperature water, meaning this brewer has to both heat the water and then extract, it like decimates the amount of times you can brew back to back. I've been able to heat and brew, I think kind of a max of 3 times on a single charge before it's time to plug this thing back in. Which means running a full preheating cycle becomes like a little less economical if you're looking to make multiple espressos. This is really a one charge will last you 1 day if it's, let's say, you and a partner out camping and making espresso with this in the morning from scratch. Also, we have like one other thing that I want to look at with this brewer, which is in fact a little bonus kit that doesn't automatically come with this, but I think is really important. And frankly, I would recommend if this seems like something you're interested in. Outin sells this basket accessory kit that comes in at around $40. And frankly, it makes the brewer like way better. So first things first, in this kit, you have an alternative basket / portafilter fitting, and this one has a significantly larger basket. This basket can hold up to 18 grams, so you really can pull more traditional espresso shots rather than being limited by the fact that we can only really fit 8 grams of coffee into the basket that the Outin comes with. It comes with a really lovely little dosing funnel, snaps on very nicely to the basket. You get a little distribution tool, which is, I don't often use just a singular little spoolie to distribute, but this is nice to have for sure. Then you also get a really nice tamp. This is no more of that scoop and tamp scenario. This is something real and tangible. We are gonna pack a truly glamorous 18 grams of coffee into our basket. Use our little WDT. This is a very deep basket. You really gotta reach down to the bottom. Press until it's flush. Look at her. Okay, let's brew. Now, for the sake of this final brew, I'm gonna use preheated water, and you can see just how fast this actually works if you just use preheated water. If you're curious about the process of the heating as well, you can watch these little lights. You'll see them kind of flicker as to what stage it's at. When it's at a full 4 lights, that means it's about to extract. Cheers. The body of the brewer is fully preheated at this point. I have full control over the dose of coffee I'm using, and I was able to pull a really nice 1 to kind of 2.5 espresso shot here. Now here's the thing. This brewer is definitely not perfect, but I still like it. First things first, I think it is super cool that this is capable of heating water to even close to a brewing temperature while also brewing the espresso. However, it does it to somewhat questionable success. I think it does it pretty well when it has a heating cycle run through it, but off the bat without any heating cycle, it's a little bit questionable for sure. I think this is a brewer that best pulls more traditional shots of espresso using more traditional like blends and espresso profiles, which is not a bad thing, but it's a very specific thing for some people, whereas people who are using like acidic, bright, light coffees may not find as much success as easily. I think I also just really wish that the add-on basket, the much larger one, had been the stock basket on this versus something like the really tiny basket we have. I realize that it's kind of a double-edged sword because by using that smaller basket size, you also allow people who use Nespresso capsules to use something like this, but I don't really know if those are the people who are buying this brewer. I feel like the primary audience for this brewer is people who would automatically benefit more from having that larger basket size to play with. This brewer allows you a decent amount of control over the extraction of your shot, frankly. It's thoughtfully built, it feels very intentional, the build quality feels really nice, and frankly, it's pretty easy to use. Especially if you're adding creamer or milk or whatever, even that first shot I pulled with a slightly lower temperature would be perfectly passable. I mean, we're talking about either having no espresso or some okay espresso, and frankly, I would rather have okay espresso than no espresso. But I don't know, those are my thoughts on the Outin Nano. I'm very curious to hear all of yours, especially if you are someone who has one. Do you find yourself running preheating cycles? Do you use preheated water? Do you just live with room temperature water? Tell me about your workflow and routine with this. I frankly am very excited to take this on future travels. I think this plus a tiny scale plus a hand grinder will give you a really nice cup, infinitely better than anything you're gonna get in your hotel. Regardless, I'm gonna go enjoy the rest of my shot. And this was fun. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye, everyone.